violence against women is still far from being done. Right now, as the world focuses all its energies on the current pandemic, there is a shadow pandemic that is lingering on in the background, and this is violence against women. In conflict-affected environments like South Sudan, cases of violence against women have been on the rise, especially during this period of the pandemic. In fact, this week, the Honorable Minister for Gender, Child, and Social Development, that is Honorable Aya Benjamin Warile, was in the press, and she was talking about the fact that cases of gender-based violence have been on the increase during the pandemic, and in fact, cases of rape against women have been on the rise. What is sad about the situation is that the perpetrators of these acts of violence against women are still going on unpunished, and we're yet to see greater implementation of laws, policies, and services that protect women and girls against violence. But all is not gloom, because this is where women's civil society organizations come into play. You see, women's civil society organizations are uniquely placed to tackle violence against women and girls, because women in local women-led civil society organizations, they understand the cultural context of the survivors of violence. They're able to navigate cultural, geographic, and political barriers, and they do share in this women's lived experiences because they are women themselves. This makes them relatable and effective agents of social change. Women-led civil society organizations in South Sudan operate under challenging conditions, where you find that amenities like good transport and communication, running water, electricity, and things like internet, which we are using for today's meeting, are just luxuries. And to be able to support women civil society organizations to conduct their work effectively, we need more funding, we need more infrastructural and more capacity building support. I'm not going to talk much about this because today we shall be hearing firsthand from women civil society leaders in South Sudan who are leading, creating, and sustaining social movements that are responding to violence against women. Also joining us today are faculty members from various universities in the US who have been doing research on violence against women, and most notable being researched by Dr. Mary Ellsberg, who is the director of the Global Women's Institute at George Washington University. It is my hope that as we listen to the speakers and panelists today, we can all learn from the best practices shared, we can celebrate their successes, we can discover new opportunities, and we can overcome challenges that will eventually contribute to ending the cycle of violence against women. As I conclude, I would like to welcome you all once again. Thank you so much for listening. And I will now invite Ms. Devyani Dixit, the Global Women's Institute Senior Research Associate, to take us through the logistical aspects of today's event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grace, for your wonderful welcome. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar. As Dr. Grace mentioned, my name is Devyani Dixit, and I'm a Senior Research Associate at the Global Women's Institute. So before we continue hearing from many of the wonderful speakers and panelists, I'd like to explain the logistics of this webinar and share a few points for a smooth experience. Since we have so many attendees, your audio and video are disabled to ensure that we have good connection, but you're welcome to ask questions in the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom center area of your screen. So if you look right at the bottom, you'll see a menu and there'll be something that says Q&A. As different speakers and panelists present, please feel free to send questions for the Q&A session that we will hold in the last 30 minutes of this event. Please note that we will not be able to address all of your questions during the Q&A, but we will do our best to collect the questions and group them. And the speakers and panelists will then answer these questions once the presentation is over and we open up for Q&A. I would recommend waiting for some of the speakers to present and panelists to talk, because some of your questions might indeed get answered throughout the event as well. So Towards the end, when we open up for Q&A, is a great time to send some of your questions. The chat function is not for Q&A, and we've actually disabled this for you. If you have an issue, you can directly write to one of us through the chat function. And also please note that we are recording this presentation and it will be available on our Global Women's Institute webpage. It's also currently live on the SWEN Facebook page. So if you have any colleagues who'd like to tune in, please let them know. And finally, Lily, next, please. Finally, the Croc Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of San Diego invite you to take part in a survey for their year-long study called Investing in Equity, Creating Equitable Funding for Local Women Peace Builders. Please find the links to this survey in the chat box that my colleague Skylar will be sending out. And please note that there are two links. One is for women peace builders. So if you identify as a peace builder, please take this survey. The other one is for peace funders. So if you identify as a peace funder, please take that survey. And we will also share this information when after this event is over, and we'll be sending you an email. You'll get that information then too. So don't worry if you forget to save the link. But please do look for that. And my colleague has just sent that link now. So thank you so much. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Andrew Blum to give his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devyani. And hello, everyone. Good morning from California. Here it is morning, and it's actually still dark outside. It's really an honor to be here. Although I'd love it if we could all be gathering in Juba as well. Someday I'll come back, Lily, and I'll come see you in Juba. I'm the executive director of the Croc Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of San Diego. We're an applied research institute, but we do research a little bit differently than some other research institutes. The real core of our mission is to learn with peacemakers. So we do our research in collaboration with peacemakers that you'll meet today, Lillian and Rena and Ruth and Moserat. And one of our core areas from the beginning has been women, peace, and security. We house the Women Waging Peace Network, which was formerly at Inclusive Security, founded by Swanee Hunt. And for the last 15 years or so, we've been running the Women Peacemaker program annually. When we got started, the Women Peacemaker program was really about a chance for women peacemakers to come to our campus to reflect, even to recharge. And we still provide that opportunity, but what we heard from women over the years is that reflection period is great, but we really need and want to drive change in our field also. So as we started working with our Women Waging Peace members and our women peacemakers, to really understand what issues we should focus on, what we heard and what we began to focus on was issues like how do we assess closing civil society space and increasing threats toward women peacemakers, both in the offline and now particularly in the online spaces? How do we support the next generation of women peace builders to make sure there's peace builders, younger peace builders coming up behind the senior peacemakers we often work with? And of course, how do we continue focus on inclusion of women in peace processes at every level? And what we heard a lot is what our research is focusing on now and what we're going to talk about more today, and that's how to create equitable funding partnerships that are genuinely responsive to the needs of women peace builders. And when we started this work, it was interesting. We expected the women peacemakers to be a little bit frustrated about the funders. I've worked as a funder. I've worked as somebody who gets funding, and complaining about donors is a universal. Everyone complains about donors. Apologies to the donors who are listening. I've been on your side of the table as well. But what we also saw was that the international funders that we worked with were frustrated as well. They knew what best practice was, and they knew the obstacles that they were working with in their own organizations to use better practices when they were funding. And so we realized that if we brought funders and women together, we could really figure out and co-create solutions that improve the funding system overall. And we knew we had to have those conversations in places like Washington, D.C. and London and Geneva, where so much of the funding comes from. But also we had to have those conversations in places like Juba and Lahore, where the local dynamics also impact the way funding happens, the way the relationships and the dynamics between international partners and women peace builders are impacted. So that's what this conversation today is doing. What does it look like, in Juba to create better funding systems there that really center the work of women peace builders? And I'm sure the conversation today will really contribute to that. As Devyani said, this is part of a longer process. We had meetings in San Diego where we dug in on these issues. We're doing a survey, we're doing interviews, and it's really a 12-month process to get beyond the kind of easy solutions and really find solutions that will drive change in this field and create more effective work on the ground by women peacemakers. Finally, I just want to share some exciting news. Despite all the challenges that are all around us right now, we have identified our 4 women peacemakers for 2020. I can't name names yet, but we have 4 fantastic women who will be joining us from Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Tanzania. So look for that announcement soon. Again, thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Lillian. This is going to be a great event, and I'm really honored to be here. So with that, I did want to turn it over and let our 2019 women peacemakers introduce themselves. So I think Ruth Buffalo, you are kicking us off.
Hey, good morning. G'dag Gutesigids in the Hiradza language. Madashi Mia Adeshheads, Mabe Sigids, Madzigidads Nakbagao. Hello, good people. My name is Ruth Buffalo. I'm originally from Mandaree. I grew up on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. I'm a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, and I live in South Fargo with my family. I am a women's peacemaker for the 2019-2020 fellowship, and it's an honor to be here with you today. A lot of my work is focusing on prevention of further violence against women, prevention of further tragedies. As a public health professional, we always want to look at the root causes, and a lot of the root causes stem from a lot of poor policies and historical trauma and overcoming genocide. As a First Nations or a First People Indigenous person of these lands here in the United States, which I currently am on the Dakota and Anishinaabe people's lands, it's so important that we have the uncomfortable conversations first and foremost to address a lot of the systemic issues that we're facing today are symptoms of larger issues that really haven't been addressed in our country. And so it's always good to have those uncomfortable conversations and talk about the true history of our country in order to prevent further violence. So Madzigidads, thank you for having me in this virtual space with you, and I will turn it over to Rina.
Good morning, good afternoon from Israel, Palestine. Can you hear me well? Good? Okay. So thank you so much for making this event possible. Thank you first and foremost for Lillian, for all the work that you do for women and for the Alliance of Women in South Sudan. My name is Rina Kedem. I live in Israel, Palestine. I work with Palestinians, Israelis, and Jordanians in order to create environmental cooperation and to develop women leadership through economic decision-making and to political decision-making. And I want to share that at the moment, we are in very turbulent times here in this land. I don't know how much you're aware, but there's protests, a lot of political protests, and just these past few days, a very shocking rape case was exposed in the media. And what's happening now, for almost the first time, there is an uprisal all over the country led by women, and not only women, but young women, youth. And this is happening in both the political uprisal and also what I just mentioned. So I think now more than ever, I can say that in this land, people are ready to move on to a step of participatory democracy and leadership and have women be the front. So there's a lot of organizations advocating for it. And I can say that also in the shared realm of Palestinian, Israeli, and Jordanian and other countries in the Middle East, women are coming together, and I'm part of several organizations that do that work. And we are partnering in order to change the situation and change the face of leadership of this area. So I'm grateful for your efforts, and I'm joining and supporting whatever you do in South Sudan, and to know that you are part of a network of women who carry this prayer, who carry this work in their hearts and minds in order to have a better future and present right now and for our children. And last, I'll just say that I work with several organizations here, including a local organization that's also called Women Wage Peace. Yeah, the biggest grassroots organization in Israel. I teach at the Hebrew University about conflict and development and how to do development areas. And I work for two other grassroots and reconciliation, and it's research and hands-on community leadership and development. And thank you. It's an honor to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Rina. Mosarat, are you with us? Okay, I'm gonna then let Lillian introduce herself as well. I believe
I'm
Mosarat
here,
might be joining
Andrew.
us.
Sorry,
there you
Andrew.
are. Fantastic.
Yes. So I will not be actually, I just thought for, so good morning, Andrew. Good morning, good evening to everyone. Thank you for having me, and congratulations, Lillian, for organizing such a great event. I just would like to introduce myself. I'm Musarat Kadim, and I run an organization. It's called PAMAN Trust in Pakistan. PAMAN works with women and youth in the area which was hard hit by violent extremism. It's called the area that borders Afghanistan. It's called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So we work with the youth and women and help them in the de-radicalization, reintegration, and rehabilitation. Rehabilitating them in their communities. We use the religious and cultural narratives to influence the mindset of the youth who had been radicalized by violent extremist groups in Pakistan. We also work with the mothers and with the women in the communities to make them understand and make them realize the negative impact of violent extremism on themselves and in their families and communities, and give them the leadership skills to be able to lead the peace-building initiatives in their communities. This is the work that we have been doing. We do a lot of advocacy on inclusive policy framework, inclusive security policy framework in Pakistan, and of course at the international level as well, because when it comes to women, peace and security agenda, most of the countries who have developed the National Action Plan on 1325, they can work around the framework, but some of the countries like Pakistan who have not yet developed the National Action Plan on 1325, it is so difficult for the civil society organizations to operate because there is no framework available, and there is always a challenge for us, and we are always under the radar of the government and of course the security agencies. So we are working in a very challenging environment. We really need to actually have a framework within, so that we can work within the context of our country around 1325 and women, peace and security agenda. We can actually move forward on that. I also teach at various universities on women, peace and security, on the women, peace and security arena. This is the work we do. We do a lot of work on peace education, and the peace education we don't mean only in the communities. We actually have developed inclusive peace curriculum, where we have been working with the students of different universities and the madaris. The madaris are the religious seminaries in Pakistan. So we have been working with the women madaris, female teachers of the madaris, so that they understand how to educate their students around pluralism and teach them the value of tolerance and peaceful coexistence. This is the type of work I have been doing for the last 20 years now. Thank you so much once again, and wish you all the best for your endeavor, Lillian, and wish you all the best, the group that you have just formed. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mosarat. Lillian, over to you.
Thank you so much. As you know, my name is Lillian, and I have been working in the Women's Empowerment Project for quite some time. And I went to work for the government. I was the Minister of Finance and then the Agriculture. But now I am back to the civil society work because I love it so much. So I don't want to take that much time, but as you might know, South Sudan is the newest country in the world, but yet the least developed one. So we have a lot of challenges, and we are going to hear today from the women from the ground and from the study that has been done in terms of the women experiencing violence in this newest nation in the world. So I'm looking forward to a very fruitful discussion, and just back to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Devyani now to take us forward with the event.
Thank you so much. It was so great to hear from all of you, and thank you, Andrew, as well. Now we're going to have Dr. Mary Ellsberg give a presentation on the No Safe Place study. Mary, to you.
Thank you. And yes, I'm off. Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. We are so honored to be able to join Lillian and the other courageous women peacemakers who have just come before me, and the other partners who are all joining together to make this a very successful event. I'm going to present the findings very briefly, the headline findings of a study that the Global Women's Institute did together with CARE International and the International Rescue Committee, and funded by the UK government under a project called the What Works to End Violence Against Women in Conflict. And we called the study No Safe Place. This was, we presented this, the main findings a few years ago, but now we are actually publishing the findings in the next few weeks. They'll be coming out in PLOS ONE and in the journal Violence Against Women. And we'd be happy to send copies to all of you who are on this webinar. Next slide, please. We decided to do this study in South Sudan, again, because it was the world's newest nation. And as we were starting to look at the issue of violence against women in conflict settings, conflict had just broken out in South Sudan in December of 2013. And we thought it was very important to document what was going on. So we did a survey where we talked to over 2,000 women and almost 500 men in 3 different sites in South Sudan. One was Juba, the capital. The other was Rumbek in Lake State. And the third one was the protection of civilians settings in outside of Juba, where a large part of the population of Juba, particularly the Nuer citizens, had fled during the crisis, and many of them are still there. So we did a survey using a random sample based on households and maps of households of these almost 3,000 men and women. But we also did qualitative research because we wanted to hear the stories of women and men, and both in the community, young women and men, and older people, and other kinds of stakeholders, humanitarian actors, village leaders, government officials, and understand what they thought were the main causes of violence against women and girls. And altogether, we spoke to almost 500 or more than 500 people in this qualitative research. Next, please. And just to give you a sense of the kinds of participatory methods we used, we held focus groups where we would ask people to list what are the kinds of violence that were most common in their community, which are the ones that took place within the home, which ones happened in the communities, and what kinds of violence were taking place as a result of the crisis, and how these were all related. And then we would go into more detail, and we got some very rich and very moving stories from this. We also spoke to survivors of violence about their own experiences. Next. This is just an example. Typical focus groups are, 8 to 10 people, but when we came to interview the local Boma chiefs in this part of Juba, we found a much larger group of people who also wanted to hear what the chiefs had to say. Next. And in the Juba POC camps, you can imagine how difficult it was to be able to talk to people privately. And for us, it's very important when we talk to women that we can maintain complete privacy, that nobody else will be able to hear the conversation, so that they're able to talk about their experiences of violence in an environment where they won't have to be afraid that somebody will be, will be beating them afterwards for speaking of it, or that there will be some kind of repercussions. Next. We also made sure, and this is part of our ethical guidelines, that for all of the women that spoke to us, that we would have opportunities for them to seek counseling. We had 24-hour a day counselors, and even transportation, so the counselors could go to the house of the women if they were experiencing any ill effects, even just fear or sadness from having talked about these experiences. And this is the IRC GBV clinic in the hospital of Rumbek as an example. And we also gave cards to everybody with hotline numbers that they could call if they were experiencing difficulties. Next. So just a few of the headline findings. One, we found that almost about a third of all women in all three places, Juba, Rumbek, and the POCs, had experienced sexual assault by non-partners. So they'd either experienced rape or attempted rape. More than 40% of them had experienced non-partner sexual violence more than once. And 60% of the women were under 19 when the rape took place. So this is literally 1 in 3 women, and this is about 4 times the global average in the world of rape. So this is one of the places where that has the highest levels of rape in the world. Next. We also found, we were looking for relationships between the conflict and how that had affected women's safety. And we found that over 70% of the rape that women in Rumbek and POCs that they experienced was related to displacement or attacks on their villages, that's when the majority of the rape took place. A great amount of it, a majority of it was by armed actors. Next. But despite the very extremely high levels of rape in these 3 sites, we found that women were actually at greater risk of sexual and physical violence from their intimate partners. And this is something that's often not really taken into account in crisis situations, that women are not only experiencing rape as a weapon of war, but they're also experiencing violence in their own homes. So about almost 3/4 of women had experienced in Rumbek, and about 2/3 of women in the other sites had experienced physical or sexual violence from a partner in their lifetime. And you can see that it's also in the last 12 months very high. And in Rumbek, it was 63%, which is also more than double the global averages. So that's, we think it's really important to understand that women experience many different kinds of violence during their lifetimes, and that the cumulative effects of this are really devastating. Next. We also, in our qualitative interviews, heard from many, many people about the practice of bride price as being a major driver of child marriage, abductions, and other forms of violence against women, particularly in Rumbek, which is an area that has a lot of cattle raids. And people would say over and over again, it really comes back to the cows. So families with very few resources who have lost their resources in the war might be anxious to have their girls married at a very young age in order to receive the cattle that come as bride price. And young men who don't have cattle or have lost their wealth, might resort to rape or to abduction or to cattle raids in order to be able to marry. And so this was something that we also found was a real key driver of a lot of the violence that was taking place. Next. This was a line that, that we heard from somebody in Rumbek, that women and girls are often beaten by brothers and uncles and anyone who benefits from the cows. Next. This is a line from a woman activist in Rumbek. We are tired of being raped. We met with the chiefs and raised our concerns. We have had no response yet. And I put this line here because I think it's so important to honor and to acknowledge the work of women peacemakers in South Sudan. They have played such an important role, and they've been so courageous in standing up to the violence and demanding peace. And one of our main recommendations at the end of this study has been, and we've presented this in the UN, at the Security Council, and to donors and members of the peace negotiations, the importance of having women peacemakers at the negotiation tables, to have them involved in the state building and peace building that is coming hopefully as a result of the peace negotiations, and to support autonomous women's groups, because the work that they're doing is so vital. Next slide, please. So as I said, we presented originally our findings more in a policy environment and internationally, but we thought it was so important that these findings also be accessible to women in the country and that they could be able to use them in their own efforts. So just last year we did, and this is the next slide, we carried out a workshop in Juba with the participation of women's groups from all over South Sudan, and presented the results, and then worked with them and with South Sudanese artists to develop materials that would allow women to talk about these findings in their communities and talk with their communities about possible solutions. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to close by showing you, these are the artists. This is how the artists and the activists worked together to sort of develop what they thought were images that would both describe the drivers of violence, what made communities unsafe, as well as solutions and what would make communities safer. Next slide, please. And these are just some examples of the pictures that came up, showing, for example, cattle raids and abduction of girls, and then the safe community version of communities getting together to celebrate events and not be fighting. Next one. This is an image of intimate partner violence, of a man who is potentially forcing his wife into sex when she doesn't want to, and the alternative, which would be peaceful communication and cooperation between partners. And the final one, which was obviously, next slide, the most important piece that all South Sudanese women and men that we spoke to were, their greatest wish was for peace and for upholding the Constitution and the rights of both men and women. And I will stop there, and thank you again for allowing us to participate in this event.
Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing that. Next, we have Dr. Patricia Morris, and she's the Director of Gender and Inclusive Development at Encompass. Morris.
Yes, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And it's really great to be here. I'm going to be presenting on some results of still ongoing study that the South Sudan Women's Empowerment Network and Lillian, who we met earlier, are working on, and that we've been supporting. And I'm going to present some preliminary findings on perspectives about the factors affecting support for women's civil society organizations in South Sudan to be able to address the gender-based violence issues that Mary has just talked about, and other development and relief issues in South Sudan. Next slide. So the South Sudan Women's Network and of course the Croc Institute, as Andrew has mentioned earlier, is conducting this, big research on funding for women's organizations. And so Lillian and the South Sudan Women's Empowerment Network are focusing specifically on South Sudan and doing multi mixed methods research on this that also includes interviews with donors and with women's organizations. But the early part of the research that we've done has been a survey that examines from South Sudanese women's organizations' perspectives factors that affect funding for their organizations. And as we've already discussed, these women-led organizations are working to end cycles of violence against women and to promote women's participation and protection and other women, peace and security issues. Next slide. So, as we've sort of mentioned earlier, women-led organizations in South Sudan are really providing key humanitarian and development assistance in their communities, including GBV programming, advocacy campaigns, for peace, legal aid, economic empowerment, health services. But these organizations face enormous challenges in accessing direct funding, from peace funders, including the fact that, a lot of the funding that they get is indirect funding through intermediary organizations like international NGOs, their own limited institutional capacity, weak financial accountability systems, and lack of adequate external support. Next slide. And so we wanted to be able to, as part of this study, to identify what are the kinds of things that need to happen to strengthen the partnership between women-led organizations and international peace funders or donors in South Sudan, and also to begin to have some indications of how to develop a program that would strengthen South Sudanese women's organizations' capacity to access donor funding. Next slide. So let me tell you a little bit about this survey. It's an online survey. It was collected recently, July 17th to August 17th. The population for the survey was the Women's Peacemakers of South Sudan Network. There are about 105 members, of that network. The number of individuals that answered the online survey was 36, which means that we had a response rate of 34%. So let me share with you, some of the results of the survey. And we basically asked questions, looking at, 4 areas and trying to get, South Sudanese women's organizations perspectives on these 4 issues. So the first is donor interest and confidence in a donor interest in funding for women, peace and security issues, and their confidence in South Sudanese women's organization. Questions about their preferences for for funding intermediary organizations. Questions on donor requirements and what the extent to which women's organizations can meet those, or some of the challenges they're faced there. And then some larger questions about the women's organizations, capacity to be able to secure funding. So here are some of the results. Next slide. We did ask questions about adequacy of funding. And, one question was whether or not funding is enough for the work that needs to be done on women, peace and security issues. And 50% of the respondents disagreed or strongly disagreed with that, saying that they really felt that the funding, was not enough. In terms of their perspectives on, please go back to the other one. In terms of their perspectives on accessing funding and the extent to which, it is, they have the ability to do so. There again, we see that the majority, 74% either disagreed or strongly disagreed, with that statement. Next slide. We asked questions about donor interest, understanding, and confidence. And, it was really an overwhelming majority, 84%, either strongly agreed or agreed that donor interest in peace, women, peace, and security issues in South Sudan is high. We also asked about, the extent to which donors understand the contributions that women's organizations are bringing to peace and security issues. And here again, 84% either strongly agreed or agreed, that donors understand what those contributions are. On the other hand, however, when asked about the extent to which they believe that donor organizations have confidence in their capabilities, here we see that almost half, 48%, disagreed or strongly disagreed with that statement. So high interest in the issues, but low confidence in the extent to which South Sudanese women's organizations can address those issues. Next slide. We also asked questions about preference for intermediary organizations on the part of donors. And, as you can see here as well, some really high responses in, related to donor preference for these organizations. In the first question we asked, do the extent to which, representatives of South Sudanese women's organizations believe that donors funding for peace and security issues go more to intermediary organizations like international NGOs as opposed to local South Sudanese women's organizations. And here we see, the majority, almost all, 97% either strongly agree or agree with that statement. The fourth question, is also in a similar vein where we asked about, is there a higher preference for the international NGOs than for the South Sudanese women's organizations for donor funding? And here we see 87% either strongly agree or agree with that statement as well. And then we asked a couple of questions about partnerships with intermediary organizations. First one, asking about the extent to which intermediary organizations that are working on women, peace, and security issues, partner with South Sudanese women's organizations. And here, the responses are really across the board, like 43% agree, 26%, about a quarter of the respondents, neither agree or disagree, and another 23%, disagree, with that statement. And so I think it suggests that there are differences in experiences that different organizations are having in terms of partnering with intermediary organizations. And then we asked another question in terms of, when there is partnership, is the share of funding that is awarded to the South Sudanese women organizations sufficient for the contracted program activities that they would be working on? And here, also a very large majority, 69%, disagree or strongly disagree with that statement. Couple more results to share. Next slide. We asked questions about donor requirements, to get a sense of, in terms of proposal requirements, reporting requirements, are at a level that may not be at the level where South Sudanese women's organizations are, because they're really smaller organizations. And here are some of the results that we found. And to the statement that donor proposal requirements are complex and is one of the reasons why few the numbers of South Sudanese women's organizations apply, 94% either agreed or strongly agreed, with that statement. In terms of donor reporting requirements being burdensome for South Sudanese women's organizations, 54% either agreed or strongly agreed with that statement, but 30% disagreed with that. So we also have almost a third that are saying that the donor requirements are not burdensome, even though the majority agree that it is. And then finally, the question about what should donors do about this? Should they provide proposal preparation, capacity building for South Sudanese women's organizations, for instance? And 96% of the respondents either agreed or strongly agreed with that. Next slide. Final results that I want to share with you. We did ask also about South Sudanese women's organizations' capacity in terms of being able to have the sort of capabilities to actually go after and secure funding. And what we find is that the majority of the respondents either strongly agreed or agreed on the 4 points that we asked about, right? When we asked, if South Sudanese women's organizations had higher experience and capacity in proposal development, would they be able to receive more donor funding? 72%, strongly agreed or agreed with that. When we asked about, having more capacity in terms of financial accountability, 76% either strongly agreed or agreed with that. When we asked about, having, greater capabilities in grant reporting, and if that would then have, more of an impact on them being able to receive more donor funding, 69% either strongly agreed or agreed with that. And then we asked a question about support for core costs and overhead, and if they felt that if they were to get more external support to that, if that would help them to achieve more donor funding, and 87% either strongly agreed or agree with that as well. Next slide. And so quickly, I just want to summarize, what we found from the survey. And one is that the adequacy of funding for women and peace and security issues and the accessibility to funding for women organizations in South Sudan are insufficient as far as the survey respondents are concerned. Also, that donor interest in funding these issues is high, and donors' understanding of the contribution that women organizations are making for, to peace and security and, anti-gender-based violence work, that donors understand the contributions that South Sudanese women's organizations are making there. On the other hand, the respondents believe that donor confidence in their ability to do the work is low. So that's an interesting, contrast there. They also believe that donors prefer to fund intermediary organizations, and that most of the funding actually does go to intermediary organizations. And that when intermediate organizations partner with South Sudanese women's organizations, the share of funding is insufficient for their program activities. Next slide. Final set of summary of what we found. The South Sudanese women's organizations that responded to the survey believe that donor and proposal reporting requirements are constraints, that they would receive more funding if they had increased capacity in proposal preparation, financial accountability, and grant reporting. They also feel that donors should provide capacity building for proposal cooperation, preparation for their organizations, and that more external support for core costs and overhead would increase their ability to secure donor funding. Next slide. So in conclusion, I mean, I think we've seen also from Mary's presentation that, you know, South Sudanese women's organizations play an important role in ending cycles of violence. They've been very, they've worked for years and years during the prolonged war to spread the message of peace. They advocate for women's inclusion in the decision-making processes at all levels. They also provide necessary services and community development and humanitarian assistance programs. And so it does seem that it is really important for us to find ways to address the constraints that South Sudanese women organizations face in securing donor funding to adequately support the work that they're doing, but also to scale up the work that they're doing, because we know that it's really important and effective work. And in the end, it's essential to peace and security in South Sudan. Next slide. So thank you so very much. And, you know, we'll be happy to take your questions during the Q&A part of this event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morris, for that wonderful presentation. Now we'll be transitioning into the South Sudan Women Peacemakers panel, and Dr. Morris will be moderating this panel. And we have 4 wonderful panelists today, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Morris to moderate. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so, you know, good morning and good afternoon again. We are so happy to be able to have representatives, South Sudanese women peacemakers, you know, organizational representatives that are on the ground doing the real important work. And, you know, we have Jacqueline and Julia and Josephine and Rose. And we'd first like to begin with, you know, having each of them tell us a little bit, you know, about their organization and the work that they're doing and the challenges that they're facing to be able to, you know, have the adequate resources to address, you know, gender-based violence and other women, peace and security issues. Maybe we'll begin with Jacqueline.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon all over the world. Thank you very much, Swen and the university for organizing this forum. I'm called Jacqueline Asiwa. I'm the founder of a women's rights organization in South Sudan called the Center for Inclusive Governance, Peace and Justice, which was founded in 2017. And we have 4 main areas where we work. One is on governance and women leadership, and then access to justice and transitional justice, peace building, and community empowerment. For the past years, we have been working on Victims Project, where we support victims and survivors of human rights violations. We operate in 3 main areas, in Jongole, which is Bor, in Western Equatoria in Mundri, in Central Equatoria in Yei, and our office is in Juba. We have also been doing a lot of work on transitional justice, like empowering communities to be engaging in transitional justice so that it's a citizens-led process. We have developed quite a number of civic education materials, which included pictorial, Citizens Guide to the Transitional Justice Process, and we were able to analyze the peace agreement from a gender lens, and including the legal analysis of the peace agreement and making recommendations where women can be effectively participating. With funding from CARE, we are able to do women's rights awareness campaign, and also working with communities to dialogue on issues of sexual and gender-based violence. Currently, some of our legal officers are part of the mobile court, which is operating in Terekeka now, and we are providing a legal defense to some of the victims and clients, which included victims of gender-based violence. We are also doing capacity building for some of the victims and survivors on trauma healing and counseling, training of trainers, and also we are holding public forums, including with the University of Juba on transitional justice, as you can see in the picture. We have also small institution, and some of our funding goes to institutional capacity building of our staff, which included financial support and establishing systems for the organization, and also reporting. In terms of our challenges, we have quite a lot of challenges, and I think some of them are mentioned already in the research. One is the high donor requirement. So sometimes the donors require things to do with having an established office, having audit reports, and as a young organization, we have not been audited, and that makes us to lose out in some of the proposals. The other one is that most donors, they have already their traditional partners. And for us being new with the civil society space, we miss out because they already have designated civil society that they work with, and women's rights organizations are mostly new, and they come together with the peace processes. The other challenge we have is that when you look at the donor requirement, sometimes they go through intermediaries, as said, and some of these intermediaries, they really don't have a mandate that works with women. So they only put women's organizations as mainstreaming gender, and it's not part and component of their core goal that they would like to empower more women. So that makes women's projects and proposals within this context to miss out, because mainstreaming gender is not really a whole project that empowers women. And finally, I could say that we also have a challenge with lack of feedback from donors. There's little capacity that they input to women's rights organizations. And sometimes when we miss out in the proposals, we don't get feedback that can help us to improve. And hence women feel frustrated, and we can no longer continue to apply for projects. And we keep asking ourselves, what's wrong with our proposals as women's rights organizations? Yet some organizations keep getting the funding. So these are some of the challenges that are hampering our work, and it's making us not to move forward as women's rights organizations. Thank you for the organization.
Jacqueline, thank you so very much, for that and for identifying, a number of challenges. And, I think two new ones that you've identified are the fact that many organizations are new, so they don't have a track record with donors, but also that there's a lack of feedback. Let's go now to Julia. And Julia, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and what are some of the challenges that you're facing?
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Maybe just to first say a quick thank you to the organizers, and in particular Swen, for this opportunity to be able to participate in this conversation today. My name is Julia Akur. I'm currently the Deputy Chair Lady of the Federation of Women Lawyers of South Sudan. The objectives of FIDA South Sudan include provision of legal aid services to indigent women and children, creating awareness on the rights of women and children, advocacy and lobbying for the enactment of gender-sensitive laws and policies, advocacy and lobbying for increased opportunities for women across all sectors, and finally, building the capacity of women lawyers and acting as a platform for women lawyers to come together and support each other. Some of the past work that we have done has included training of community-based paralegals, provision of legal aid to victims of rape and other forms of GBV, advocacy and lobbying for the inclusion of women and gender concerns in the transitional constitution of South Sudan, as well as advocacy and lobbying for the inclusion of women and gender concerns in the peace agreement during the peace negotiations. If I move on to the funding challenges that we have, one of the things I can say is that as an organization, we were really affected by the conflict that erupted in 2013, whereby a number of donors, and in particular our main partner, which was PACT, pulled out of South Sudan, and a lot of donor funding was diverted away from development type work to humanitarian aid, such as provision of food, water, and shelter. And as an organization, and I think we also get a sense of donor fatigue when it comes to South Sudan. The expectations were high during the independence of South Sudan, but the recurrence of the conflict has really caused a lot of donor fatigue. Also, currently, what we're facing is the reality that of COVID-19 now has related in a lot of delays to donor funding, and a lot of funds and activities have been put on hold due to COVID-19. For us as an organization such as PACT, which is an international NGO, is an important partner for us, as they were in a position to access larger funding, as well as they would sit with us and help us through the whole process of writing joint proposals, developing work plans, and monitoring and reporting on results. I can say another challenge for us also is that we, as an organization, we have often looked to donors and partners in South Sudan to get funding for our work. The funding is limited, and there are many organizations competing for the same kitty. The funds are also disbursed for activities on an annual basis or for a very short-term time. So it makes planning for longer term activities very difficult and sustainability very difficult. And then, so often we find that there are long durations of times in between projects where our staff will go without salaries and have to meet costs such as transport costs to project sites out of their own pockets. Another challenge I would say is that as lawyers, we are not trained in financial management and project proposal writing, and certainly we find that we're in need of donors who can give us funding for core activities to high administrative staff, such as finance staff, and help us to scale and grow by training us and building our capacity in these areas. Because an important part of qualifying for this call for proposals is having the financial systems in place. So core funding can really go a long way in helping us in this area. Another challenge I would say is that one of our key strategies in the past has been to partner with international NGOs or intermediaries who are in a better position to meet donor requirements for the preparation of the project proposals and have in place the financial capacity. But we now find that maybe we have to come back as an organization and begin to rethink our strategy. Certainly intermediaries are important, but we also find that it makes our growth difficult, because the intermediaries themselves take an amount of money for their own budget costs and to cover their own administrative costs, therefore leaving us limited funding to cover our own costs. So it makes it really difficult for us to scale up our activities and to grow. And also we find that sometimes in the process, the work that we do and visibility for the work that we do gets lost along the way. So not helping to build up our ability to be able in future to be able to access such funding. Another challenge I would say is that as FIDA, we have been a launching pad for a number of young lawyers whom we source from the universities in Juba. However, unfortunately, we are not able to retain the staff as we cannot pay competitive salaries due to lack of funds and our lack of know-how on where and how to access core funding. So some of our staff, once trained and exposed, go on to work with the partner organizations who they have been coordinating with. So for us, really access to sufficient core funding will really help us to be able to retain and better train our staff. I'd say another challenge I'd say is that one of our objectives is to be able to train female lawyers to provide a platform where female legal professionals can support each other. The legal profession, as you probably all know, in South Sudan is very male. So many South Sudanese lawyers were trained in Khartoum under a different system of law, and many of them were trained also in Arabic and not able or confident in English. So the Women, Peace and Security agenda is also about increasing women's voice and participation at all levels. As an organization, we do not have sufficient access to sufficient funds to be able to train and engage our members. We'd like to train our members to see more lawyers gain the confidence to open up their own law firms and provide legal aid, advance in the bench and work in prosecutions, be a critical voice advocating for gender-sensitive developments in the rule of law sector. So lack of sufficient funding has really hampered in this. We know that some of the neighboring FIDA organizations, such as FIDA Kenya and FIDA Uganda, have come up with innovative ways when it comes to looking for funds, like, for example, charging membership fees. They actively go out to the private sector to try and get funding. Or some of them have developed programs of a Friends of FIDA program where they invite private donations from individuals. But the economic crisis currently in South Sudan has made this difficult for us to try to implement. I'd say a final challenge that we face is that as much as we are an international branch of FIDA International. We do not get funding from FIDA International, and we are not able to engage in activities together with other branches. And I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Great, Julia, thank you so very much. Let's go on to Josephine. You could tell us a little bit about Steward Women and some of the challenges that you're facing.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to attend this virtual meeting, and also thanks to the organizers, SWEN and the university, for putting together this convening. My name is Josephine Chandiru Drama. I work with Steward Women, and I'm the director since 2012. Steward stands for Support the Empowerment of Women and Their Rights for Development. So we decided to add the word women because our focus is women. And in our focus with women, we provide access to justice for women and girls in South Sudan. We were established in 2009, and currently we work in 4 states. Central Equatoria, we work in Juba. Eastern Equatoria, we work in Nimule, Magwe, Torit, and Capoeira. Unity State, we work in Bentiu, and then Jongole State, we are in Bor. Some of our past achievements include prosecuting the first child marriage case, which is a landmark case, and if you Google it, you'll find it. We have prosecuted over 45 rape cases in South Sudan, mostly through the mobile court. We are currently the chair of the Rule of Law Technical Reference Group of the GBV subcluster in South Sudan. We also have observer status with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights that sits in the Gambia. We are supposed to give our first human rights report in November 2021. Coming to the work, the challenges of the work that we are doing, I'm just going to talk generally about donors because I don't know who is a donor, who is intermediary. The one who gives me money is, I know I will be referring to that as the donor. So coming to the challenges, legal aid in South Sudan accounts for only 1% of the services provided to survivors. And this is basically because donors view provision of legal aid services for victims not a life-saving service. They think medical is more life-saving, psychosocial support is more life-saving, but I feel legal is also equally more life-saving because if we do not provide legal services for survivors, impunity will continue, women will also continue to suffer, there will be case backlogs, and a lot of those things. Secondly, another challenge is the prosecution of cases is very expensive. Julia and Jacqueline can allude to that. Lawyers can charge, the town lawyers can charge from 3,000 to 4,500, especially in criminal cases and even most especially in rape cases. So this is very, very expensive for the local or the indigent person to access because they can't afford that amount of money because they're even barely living with $2 per day on their feeding. Julia talked about short periods of funding, but I also want to add that in addition to the short periods of funding, sometimes donors also give us funding in kind, in terms of they tell you, Steward Women, we're entering into partnership with you, your work will be to facilitate. For us, we come with our attendance sheet, we come with transport to fund, we pay for the hall, we pay for the refreshment. This is happening. So with that kind of attitude, how do you expect to empower a women-led organization that is coming up? Besides that, another challenge is also proposals take very long periods to process. Taking an example of the COVID-19 proposal for women-led organizations that was called in April 2020, and that time, the first case of COVID-19 had just come out. Up to today, I haven't had any information about that. And now the cases are over 2,000. So that is one of the challenges. Another challenge is the current conversation on the grand bargain. Grand bargain is focusing on localization agenda, where the focus is moving from international organizations to local or national actors, but more specific to women-led organizations. I think as far as South Sudan is concerned, we experienced that, or we enjoyed that, the grand bargain only for 1 year, 2019. But as far as I know, that localization agenda has died in South Sudan because the focus is moving from local organizations to international organizations. And even when funding is given to both local and international organizations, it is three local and 3 international. How sure are we that in those 3 for local, women organizations are inclusive? And the ratio is usually 150,000 USD for local organization, and international gets 1,500,000. And this ratio is counted 1:1. I think that is another challenge for us. Jacqueline talked of lack of feedback on proposals. Mine is to say that donors have been saying that the proposals, they received great amounts of proposals and they are not able to give feedback. How come the SSHF proposal in South Sudan receives more than 1,500 proposals and each one gets to get feedback on what happened to their proposal? Just another example is where a call for proposal was made in Juba for legal aid providers coming from women-led organizations. At that time, we were only 3 women-led organizations. That was in 2017. Up to today, we never got feedback on what happened to proposals. And they want to tell me that 3 women-led organizations are amounting to so many, they received so many proposals from women-led organizations. That analysis is very vague to me. Another challenge that we are facing is that funds are designed by donors for specific locations. This makes us lose the hotspots. For example, hotspots for sexual violence. You'll find out that a proposal for COVID-19 will be targeting a location which is not even a hotspot. So that is another challenge with the donors. Another challenge is donors imposing their own policies when signing contracts. A case in point is where a donor says, we are sending this staff, most especially the local staff, we're sending this staff to implement together with you on this project. And then because of those systems of first installment, second installment, when there are delays in release of funds, these local staff take us to court. I'm talking this from an experienced point of view. I've been imprisoned in Juba prison because the donor imposed on us their own policies. The last one I want to conclude with is the issue of kickback. This kickback is where the donor gives you a project and takes back another percentage. And then connected to this one is where donor staff have also opened small organizations. Sometimes we submit our proposals and these proposals are taken and implemented by the small organizations that belong to this donor staff. So I feel that with available resources, we can do more than what we are currently doing. Thank you for listening to me.
Great, Josephine, thank you so very much. Let's now hear from Rose from her organization and what, from her viewpoint are some of the challenges that women's organizations are facing in South Sudan. Rose?
Good morning and good afternoon, good evening from wherever we are. I'm by name Rose Achilden, Executive Director of Legacy for African Women and Children Initiative, a national women-led organization registered in Juba, based in Juba, with an aim of empowering and encourage and support children and women. We have some activities. We really look at the current activities, the priorities current activities. We are working on gender, in preventing gender and responding to GBV. And then we are doing also economic empowerment, whereby we train women in entrepreneurship. We give them life skill training in order to run the enterprises for livelihood and the sustainability in the economic. And then we have peace building. We work closely with women at the grassroots level, where
Hello, Rose, are you still there? I think she's coming back online. Please continue, Rose.
yes, what did you say?
Please continue, Rose. You're on, Rose, so you can continue with your statement. Rose, are you there? I think we may have lost our connection with Rose, but you'll be able to ask her questions during the Q&A section of the event when she's able to log back on. I want to thank each of you for sharing with us what you see as a number of the constraints and challenges in terms of funding for all of the important and good work that you have been doing. And I just like to maybe, if you can very quickly, because our time is up, maybe in one sentence sort of tell us what you think is the best way to move forward in terms of building relationships with donors and being able to attract more support for all of this work that you're doing. Jackie, maybe one sentence. What do you think is the most important thing that can be done?
Hello. Yeah, I think what needs to be done is to empower women leaders to be able to manage their organizations and also to be able to continue with their advocacy. So I think when donors will be making their proposals, they should have something for women's empowerment and capacity building of women leaders.
Great, thank you. Julia, what's your recommendation?
I still believe that intermediaries are very important to help us as we try and grow. But we ask that we get intermediaries who can, take us through the whole process of building our capacity in the various areas, the financial management, the reporting, the writing the project proposals. So, and giving us also equal visibility for the work that we do, so that we can eventually be able to, in future, be able to scale up and to grow.
Hey, great. Josephine, what's your recommendation?
Donors should give us long periods of funds, at least 3 years to 5 years. In between there, they can be able to see if we are growing and if we are not growing. Additionally, the institutional support for really paying the salaries of some key staff so that we don't lose them. We don't lose those whose capacities we have built to international organizations. So the core support and also overheads should be supported for women-led organizations.
Great, thank you so much, Josephine. I believe that Rose is back. And Rose, what recommendation would you have for donors going forward?
I would recommend the building and empower South Sudanese women organization technically, as in project or program management, proposal writing and reporting skills, and financial management. And it would be good also to avail direct funding opportunities to South Sudanese led women organization, and set up and strengthen women network as the main thing.
Great, thank you so much.
And I'm sorry that my network disappointed me.
That's okay. We're glad that you're still with us. Jacqueline, Julia, Josephine, and Rose, you all are you're change makers, you're peacemakers, and we are so grateful for all of the important work that you're doing, and really pleased that you are joining us today. We're going to now move on to our next panel. I want to remind participants on the event that you can submit questions for the Q&A section where it says Q&A down at the bottom of your screen, so that we can raise them for all of the panelists once we finish this final panel, which we are talking to international peace funders. We are so pleased to be able to have a representative from USAID and a representative from the Open Society for East Africa, Jennifer and Don. And so we welcome you and thank you for being here with us. And I would like to start with, what you see as the biggest challenge, for donors, not only your own organizations, but the whole donor community, and funding South Sudanese women's organizations. And maybe also to say a bit about how that challenge, has changed in the time of COVID. Jennifer, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Dr. Morris. It's a pleasure to have folks here today. I don't know if it would be helpful to provide some context about the work we're doing and then maybe get into the challenges.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. My name is Jennifer Hawkins, and I'm the Senior WPS Advisor at Usaid. I sit in Washington, D.C. Thank you to our esteemed colleagues and the panel, GW, Croc Institute for Peace and Justice, and a very huge thank you to Lillian Razik and the South Sudanese Women's Empowerment Network for hosting this important event. And I also would like to acknowledge our Peace Fellows, Ruth, Rena, and Musarat, who I'm personally honored to have the opportunity to get to know and work closely with this past year through our mutual collaboration with Croc IPJ. As you know, we have a great partnership with Croc IPJ in increasing a learning agenda around this very question, which Dr. Morris presented. We are pleased to discuss best practices in funding local women's-led peacebuilding organizations and really building an equitable partnership with women peace builders. To that end, we are actually hosting a discussion with our colleagues at the State Department, the Department DOD and DHS just next week to discuss this very issue, the challenges associated with equitable partnerships with local women and women-led organizations around the world. Just to give you some background on WPS and what we're doing for the USG, in 2019, just this past June of 2019, we released our strategy on women, peace, and security. We have the first ever legislation on WPS in the world where it actually makes women, peace, and security law. So the WPS Act of 2017 is a law, meaning no matter what, our government is responsible as a part of its foreign policy agenda to implement 1325. We also have an implementation plan for Usaid, and each of the agencies that I mentioned earlier also has an implementation plan, which is all available online and for the public. I would just kind of give you kind of the buckets that our WPS plan outlines. Participation is one, of course, a real solid principle of women, peace, and security. And then, of course, protection, which is kind of the topic of this conversation here today. We also are focused on increasing our internal capacities. So just much like local organizations, we have to do a better job with increasing our staff's training and capacity on WPS. And then, of course, the final is increasing our partnership with governments around the world on increasing their capacity to implement 1325. So, for example, we have a very good and interesting partnership with the African Union, which is holding member states accountable for their implementation of 1325. It's in particularly including increasing women's participation at all levels of decision-making processes. To the issue of funding, my office holds a very small pot of funding, which we are using to advance meaningful participation in peace processes and address the needs of women and girls affected by violent extremism, which I know Monserrat works closely in that area. And of course, increasing the protection of women and girls in areas of crisis and conflict and stability. I will say I'm not an expert on South Sudan, but I just wanted to provide you with a brief overview of the incredible work our team is doing at the mission, which is closely aligned to the objectives of women, peace, and security, and of course, the topic here today. I'm very proud to report that our mission in South Sudan is mainstreaming gender and protection in all of its programs and activities. Our WPS efforts in South Sudan are strengthening and enhancing the role of civil society and citizens' abilities to engage the government constructively in key consensus building and political processes related to women's participation in peace and reconciliation process. Usaid supports South Sudanese civil society, including ongoing support to the Women's Monthly Forum and participation of women's groups in the 2014-2015 peace process. In terms of protection and violence, since 2013, Usaid has scaled up its activities to mitigate risk of women and children to provide care for survivors of gender-based violence. Our humanitarian assistance is providing survivors of violence with medical treatment, counseling, mental health, and psychosocial support services, and referral to other services along with psychological first aid training for social workers and volunteers. At the community level, we're supporting awareness for protection issues and the services available to support them addressing these issues. For example, we're providing a mobile psychosocial team to provide basic emotional support to internally displaced persons and the establishment of safe spaces for women and children. So I really look forward to continue the conversation here today. And of course, working closely with our colleagues at the South Sudan mission and all the missions around the world, frankly, in implementing women, peace, and security. In terms of your question regarding challenges, we really tried to unpack this a lot in our time at Croc together. And I think it was a really good understanding of having two conversations with the donors and the partners on the challenges. And it was just an understanding of the world. I think they were very fascinated to know how complex our funding mechanisms can be and all the restrictions as we talk about requirements for reporting that we're under to report again, particularly for our monies, you know, even having the conversation with the Peace Fellows about the congressional kind of requirements that we have to report to Congress about the funds that we spend. So that's why the reporting requirements sometimes seem very onerous. So there are some challenges in terms of getting money rapidly to organizations. We did this really well in Burma, and I would love to kind of repeat this, is where we were paying for childcare and elder care or transportation to actually get women to the peace table and participate in peace processes, or just training where they couldn't participate if they didn't have the means to pay for those very simple issues. So I think that is one example where I would love to have a flexible funding mechanism for those types of things going forward to implement WPS. And so we're going to unpack that next week and get our brains together with our colleagues at the State Department and Department of Defense and DHS to think about how we really can have some concrete efforts to amplify those flexible funding mechanisms. Thank you.
Great, thank you so very much, Julia. Don, what's your take on all of this? What do you see as some of the big challenges, and how is COVID affecting funding, and what are some of the kinds of things that the Open Society Initiative for East Africa is working on?
Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone, wherever you are. My name is Don Bosco Malish. I'm an advisor to the Open Society Initiative for Eastern Africa. The Open Society Initiative for Eastern Africa was founded in 2005 as part of the Global Open Society Foundation Network. We're a private donor, and we operate in Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Sudan, Rwanda, South Sudan. And one of our work in South Sudan and Sudan started in 2009 and in 2011, respectively, these two countries. The Open Society Initiative for Eastern Africa, OSIA, vision is working for a just, inclusive, vibrant Eastern Africa, where all people live in dignity, equality, and participate meaningfully in their society. Our program areas include democratic governance and the rule of law, equality and non-discrimination, that's where our women and youth program falls, health and rights, and economic governance. We support individuals, initiatives, and organizations, and including also government agencies. We seek to empower by keeping our eyes on, but hands off, as we support these partners. The way we are organized as the Open Society, we have regional foundations like where I fall, but we also have thematic groups which program everywhere, but at least for us, we program within the region. In South Sudan, our current portfolio of partners is under 27, with the funding that is, especially for women, stands at about $2.4 million. Other resources that are available for women program in the Open Society include some fellowship programs, and we do also have what we call the New Executive Fund. That fund supports new executive directors and new formations that are just being established. The kind of funds we give include, we have not worked mostly with our partners. We have worked directly with the national organizations. We rarely do indirect funding through international, except where there is need for capacity and that organization can provide. And that was the case when we are supporting the media laws, when they're being formulated, and when we are supporting work on the natural resources and the Petroleum Act and the Petroleum Revenue Management Bill. Those were the areas we supported through other actors, but the bulk of our funding go direct to national organizations. We provide capacity building, and capacity building we include either into the proposal, the application that is submitted, or we maintain certain percentage of money within our organizations, and that's when we provide. We have supported, I think, a former director of SWEN, and we have supported Jacqueline, I think. She was in Morocco somewhere doing some investigative training. And we do also give core support, and core support is really for the organizations to secure their core personnel so that they don't leave the organization, especially when activities are low, but they are present in other meetings, kind of maintain them being present. And we think that is a key role, so we pay for that. Our grant support is between 1 to 2 years. We have just concluded a strategy where we now have scaled it to 3 years, depending on the activity to be done. I would like to go quickly to check in the issue, really the context in South Sudan. South Sudan presents a very polarized and militarized nature of politics, which informs the nature of organizing specific groups. The war has altered also the context in which civil society works. There is political and ethnic affiliation of many civil groups that work in South Sudan. Many civil society groups are founded and staffed along ethnic lines. That makes diversity and inclusion difficult to find and undermines the legitimacy and the credibility of the groups. Government and opposition groups constantly seek to co-opt civil society groups and sometimes subvert them and turning the groups to be partisan and creating internal mistrust. Many of the groups present themselves as localized grievance-based advocacy groups. The civic space is actually over-legislated and over-regulated, reducing the space for genuine dialogue between the state and civil society. Many times these groups have to seek permission from the national security to be able to conduct a meeting. Most funding in South Sudan is also shaped by the donors. There's limited independent original thinking. Competition for donor resources has undermined the local collaboration among civil society groups. So one is advancing with this, another one is pulling you back. There's too much subcontracting of operations to national organizations by the international without considering the need to building strong groups, organizations in the country. The funding landscape, I think one of the presenters alluded to, there's generally fatigue in funding activity in South Sudan because of the war and the lack of political will from the partners, the peace partners, to implementing the agreement. And that every time as we do programming as a national, sitting in this in the donor spaces, you find you have to constantly keep on justifying why we need to continue funding groups in South Sudan, because the results which is coming is not very attractive. Available funding tend to be informed by the context and can actually feed to either the dividers or the connectors, depending on how you do your programming. There's huge funding shift to humanitarian support since the onset of the war. Groups are overstretched and lack clear objectives, which further impedes effectiveness and in a context of limited capacity and resources. Now, what are the opportunities that I would recommend? One is that the peace agreement provides a window of opportunity for civil society groups to reinvent themselves in South Sudan so as they can play more concerted role in peace building and reconstruction efforts. This includes the need to overcome internal mistrust for the groups to forge a sense of unified national purpose. Civil society also needs to engage in new forms of relationship with the government and the citizens. This new engagement should seek to transcend the overriding donor narrative on what is beneficial for South Sudan. It should be rooted on original thinking and dialogue with diverse local stakeholders. There is need for civil society in South Sudan to learn valuable lessons from experiences of civil society organizations in Africa, in other African countries, given the similarity of context and the challenges that will inform the next steps to be able to beef up funding in the area. Before I get to the final one, I just would like to be very specific to network experiences in South Sudan. SWEN is one of the network organizations and others that we know. Generally, I think there is a need to kind of rethink how networks will need to operate, because currently the way it is being presented is that they seem not to be serving their constituency. You have members, but the members somehow don't get the benefit of being together in a network. And that is seen in a way by the fact that sometimes the networks tend to compete for the constituency and the resources together with their members. In some of the networks we have worked with, the secretariats have become a burden to their own members. Finally, there's need for thoughtful grant making to enable civil society to withstand government crackdown, organization, and support growth of middle managers. I thank you all.
Great, Don. Thank you so very much. I want to do one final quick question for both of you, and if you can provide a, a concise response. What recommendations would you make to the women's organization? What is the number one recommendation that you would make in terms of things that they should do to strengthen their partnerships with donors and to be able to receive more funding?
Yeah, I think I've learned so much just today about the incredible work some of the women are doing, and having events like this is huge and crucial. I would really advocate for women who are leading organizations to network as much as possible, and particularly with the INGOs or the intermediate organization as it's been described here today. Get to know them, stop by, drop by, see and provide handouts about what you're doing. Because I think that is a real key to really developing rapport and trust, so that when opportunities do come along, they automatically think, oh, I met this incredible woman who's doing all this work on justice or gender-based violence issues. This aligns perfectly with what we want to do with this next proposal. So I think that is a huge piece for me, is developing my own kind of network. So I know for each country, who I can name top 10 women and their organizations doing incredible work that I can refer to my other colleagues in the donor community.
Great, thank you so much for that, Jennifer. Don, if you had one recommendation, what would it be?
My key recommendation to the groups would fall in three categories. One is the question of relevance. How you position yourself within your constituency should really articulate the relevance of the organization. The second thing is you need to seek to work on competence and be deliberate about building capacity within the organization. Credibility is another that you'll work for. Personally, in my work with different groups, I take the gaps, whether in reporting or proposal, as capacity building points. What can really irritate me is issue of integrity. But when report is badly written and I look at it and turns out to be a capacity issue, is different from being an integrity issue.
Great.
And I would actually recommend it to the groups to reach out. They are not getting feedback. The fact is, for example, I work in 8 countries, and to get all these proposals and give individual feedback sometimes it's a bit difficult, given the capacity that we have. But the door remains open for anyone who would reach out for very specific questions. Thank
Wonderful. Don, thank you so much. Jennifer, thank you so much for providing, these insights, networking, relevance, credibility, as important things for women organizations, to think about as they move forward in securing additional funding. I'd now like to go back to Rose. We were sorry that you got disconnected, and maybe in about 5 minutes or so you can wrap up your presentation about what you see as challenges that you were not able to get to earlier. Rose?
Thank you very much for
Okay, so Rose, I think you need to
opportunity given to me. I would rather go quickly. Of course, in the activities that come again.
Yes, please
Hello?
continue, Rose. Yes, you may want to turn off your video and just speak because
hello, are you getting
there's
me?
a little messed up, huh? But please continue.
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Okay, okay.
Please continue, Rose.
All right. Okay, thank you. I will go quickly on the challenges and
Okay, I think that our connection with Rose is not working so well. So we're sorry about that. Maybe she's going to reconnect while we do move on to the next section, which is to be able to answer some of the questions that we've gotten from the listening audience. Let me start with this question. There's a question or a comment about that says, if proposal writing and all of the other ways of sourcing funds have not worked as they were initially intended, is it not time that we start thinking about alternative forms of supporting local-led initiatives? So the question is sort of, focusing on, are there different ways? Can we think out of the box about, different forms of or methods of funding for local organizations? Who would like to take a stab at that? Maybe Jennifer, Dawn?
Yeah, I would add it. I think, thank you for the question. I think it's an important question. And I think we are just diving deep on how we can be a little bit more agile with our funding mechanisms and really amplify those efforts. I heard a lot from the Peace Women today that, really building capacity was a big, important part of their funding. And I think one example that really worked well back in 2015 when I was in Papua New Guinea was Counterpart International was the sub INGO, but they were working with very local women organizations who obviously just didn't have internet connection to even apply for the funding or machines to write the proposals. So they took a step back from the initial kind of requirements of the program and said, no, we really need to dedicate time, and notified us as the donor to say, you know, we're not going to get started in 6 months. We actually need to probably take more time to build their capacity. So having those very frank, honest conversations between the sub and the intermediate is really helpful to say, we're not ready to really start programming. We just really need to get our own organizational capacity together. And I think having those conversations, we could be a little bit more flexible to give the women themselves and their partners opportunities to organize within their own structure a little bit better. So we are working on it, and it is difficult under, you know, kind of government institutions and structures to be as flexible and agile as we need to be at times. But thank you for the question.
Great, thank you so very much, you know, for that, Jennifer. What about Jacqueline, Julia, Josephine, or Rose? You know, what, you know, do you have any thoughts about what might, you know, some more flexible ways of funding might look like, or, you know, that you think would work in your context?
Hello.
Yes, Rose, go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, can you hear us?
Yes. Yes. I would recommend that if the networking within women is strengthened, to be able now to propose and write the proposal in a combination of proposal writing, it would be good, leaving it not to each and every hand to write on separate note and the other person on the separate note. It will give like a confusion to the donors. It is also very important to see the roles are played within, who is playing what and who is playing what and where. It will bring a direct support, and it will also enable the donors to know you clearly, and it will show a clear picture on what you do. This is what I can put.
Great, thank you, Rose. It sounds like I think part of what I heard you say is that maybe some of the different women's organizations that are working, you know, specialized in different areas can come together and do a joint, you know, proposal and sort of build on some of the differing capabilities that you would have in the different organizations. You know, what do the rest of you think about that? Jacqueline, Julia, Josephine?
I think what Rose has said is in place, like trying to organize people who are already in networks to apply for a proposal as a group. I'll also say that some donors, including UN Women, I think they have done some mapping of local women organizations working on peace building and also on issues of access to justice and human rights. So probably it will be good to have a conversation with these organizations who have done already the mapping, which include, I think, CARE. And also we have Usaid with the Women Monthly Forum. We have the Women's Coalition. So there are already existing networks that are there. And then not leaving out the constituencies and the networks at the local level, we may need to do more of assessing the local networks at the state level, because that's often left out. And we can have a call for proposal that should include them. I think one experience I had when we applied for the CARE proposal, which I think could also help some donors, is that CARE sent out the proposal, different women applied, including the ones that they are already having in existence. And then instead of just saying, this is what we are calling for and your proposal matches it, they took us back to rewrite the proposal and having people's views incorporated in what they are thinking of implementing. So those who were shortlisted, they were able to reshape the proposal. And that makes it easier for people also when they will be implementing, they'll feel like it's part of what they contributed to, and implementation becomes easier, especially for smaller women's organizations. And it also becomes a learning process for them to understand what are the things that donors look into. For example, it becomes part of the training to know what is a log frame and what are the outcomes, what are the inputs, and these kinds of things help the women's organizations to start thinking and also like building their capacity in understanding how donors want proposals to be written. So I think probably having a conversation with these major donors of how their processes are and involving women at the earlier stages before awarding contracts is really important.
Great, thank you so very much for that. Keeping on this same issue, another comment that we have received says, the capacity issues is quite complex, and I think women's organizations should clearly come out to indicate if they are networks of volunteers or established organizations. There is obviously a need for office space, and at least the technical team should be updated with key funding requirements, because funders, especially the intermediaries, fear risking too much to a group without proper credibility. Any sort of responses, maybe from Jacqueline, Julia, Josephine, Rose on that comment? What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, sorry. Maybe I could give a few comments.
Yes.
Sorry. I think one of the things I've found is that I believe it's true that credibility certainly is a key issue, but I also get the sense that sometimes donors hold women's organizations to a different standard than they do hold men's organizations. When it comes to networking, it's important. As an organization, I can say for sure, one of the things, we are a membership organization. At our formation, we drew together women lawyers who are working across different sectors, and we had an initial membership strength of 66 members. But if we do not get the funds to be able to adequately engage our members, then we get ourselves in a cycle where we're not able to carry out the objectives for which we were intended to. So I think certainly it's important to continue to remain accountable to your constituency, but I hope donors also understand the very real challenges that are there when you do not have funding and you cannot effectively organize and effectively engage all the members as they would like to be engaged. I think that's what I'd say for them.
Julia, thank you so very much for that. Don, did you want to weigh in?
Yes. And I think the issue of capacity, it is also about us, the donors. In sense, sometimes we invest too much on our own, saying we want to be secure, you put digital security and many other things, and then you forget the constituency. And we forget that that is the loose end. If information can leak out from there, you can also easily be victim. And therefore, my notion of capacity building, which is somehow what we have adapted in the open society, is we call it thoughtful grant making. A thoughtful grant making would take into account the aspects of capacity building. And the capacity building here, we look at it at about 3 levels. Staff development, so that they are competent in the areas they are trying to do. And we do also learn to see that there's an oversight in that organization. And that's when we get to do board development. And we need you to have a working space that is very enabling. It becomes a challenge. For example, when you find your partner has to walk to an internet cafe to send you a report. And in many cases, they can actually forget the flash disk there. And so what you call confidential is normal confidential. You're actually exposed. And these are things you can actually negotiate. And that's why for us in the open society, we don't make calls for proposal. It is open throughout the year. And so if you don't get feedback, you can always come back and ask what is happening. And so it is like it's not written on it's not cast on stone, the proposal. It can always be discussed. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Don, especially for sharing your definition of capacity building, because we have another comment here that says, can we interrogate the notion of capacity building? The person goes on to say, you know, I fear that focusing on this too much places the burden outside of the donor and locates it on the women who are already burdened and trying to operate in a difficult context, as you've talked about, Don. What should donors do to shift this problem? I think, Andrew, you might have some thoughts on this.
It was a little bit in relation to the previous conversation, but I think it's relevant for this as well. I mean, one of the things I think sometimes we get stuck on is that we fund organizations, and you know, even in the U.S. context, within the activist space, a lot of times funders are funding individuals or individuals that are leading movements. And so I think one of the ways we can kind of change and reimagine is not to worry about the organization that, you know, a women leader has, but to fund the woman as an individual who then leads a network or who leads a movement. And then I think that also helps with the capacity building, where a lot of times I think we want smaller organizations to look like an INGO. And so we try to build their capacity up in a very specific set of ways, because we have the INGO model where there are different ways of organizing work that we should also sort of respect and fund.
Great, thank you so much for that, Andrew. On a different note, a comment here, one of the early comments that we got is the following: ending violence against women is vital for the case of South Sudan. My question is, due to COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, GBV is on high increase to women and school-going girls. And in this point, how are, you know, or what are ways that we're going to help girls since schools are closed? Perhaps Mary or Jacqueline or Julia, Josephine or Rose may want to address that question.
I'm going to respond like this. On our part, before schools closed down, we used to work with GBV clubs in 6 schools. So when the schools closed, we have continued to work with the club members, a few of them that we can get hold of. We've done orientation for them on COVID-19 guidelines and its impact on women and girls, and more reflection has been on GBV. So we, in each of the 4 schools, we identified 5 GBV club members through their patrons to continue moving in their villages, to speak with their schoolmates, to speak with their classmates on what the experiences are during this period, and also to meet once in a week. They have come up with a drama which is run on the radio So each school comes up with a drama on COVID-19 and GBV and its impact, and then this is run on the radio. That's one of the ways we've tried to reach out to children who are out of school due to COVID-19. Maybe there will be no time, but I just wanted to say some of the experience that we have with the capacity of organizations. We've worked with one donor that has supported us since 2014. We are now going to a period where there's something they are now calling leading from the South. We are going to sit on their board leadership. So those partners that they fund are going to rotate yearly to sit on their board leadership, to make decisions, and also to just prepare proposals together. And I think for funding to be flexible, also let me add it here that we need to increase the administrative costs from 7% to at least 20%. There we will have a lot of flexibility to develop our small organizations to something better. And also funding should cater for the context, always changing context. Like we have our donor UN Trust Fund. When they gave us 500,000, they said due to COVID-19, you add 40% to cater for the changing context. I think that is something very, very useful that I wanted to just leave here. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Josephine, and thank you, everyone, for sharing your questions. I think now we're going to hear from Lillian, who's the head of the South Sudanese Women's Empowerment Network and the organizer of this event. And as we hear her comments, I also want to share with her the final question that we have in our Q&A for her to respond to. And it says, thank you to Swen for organizing this important event. And thank you to Lillian. You are such a visionary leader. Juba is hosting the Sudan peace process, and there is an impasse with regard to the negotiations on South Kordofan between the GOS and the SPLM North, led by Abdelaziz Al-Hilo. And I think that there is a need for building bridges. Are South Sudanese women's organizations playing any role in this process? And can you also provide an update on initiatives to support South Sudanese women, former combatants who went through DDR? So I give you that question and final remarks from Lillian and the South Sudanese Women's Empowerment Network.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morris, for this introduction. And I would like to thank all of you, the panelists, the speakers, the presenters, for today's event. Our contribution is really highly, highly appreciated. And we have seen some scary statistics from Mary's presentations, and we also got an understanding to what degree is the violence against women impacting women in South Sudan. And we also were able to see the results of the ongoing study that we are doing with Dr. Morris. And we also heard from the women peacemakers on the ground. And I really wanted to thank you so much, Rose. And what happened to Rose today is an example, a life example of the challenges that the women civil society face on the ground. Internet connections. Even this event was supposed to be in person, but we were not able to do it due to COVID-19. But I appreciate the challenges that women have to go through it just to be online and to be heard. So thank you so much, Rose, and thank you to all women peacemakers from South Sudan coming today and sharing your experiences. Right now, as we speak, there is more increase on the communal violence. Those of you who are in Juba and those of you who are following the news, you might be seeing a lot of news coming about the increase of violence. And the increase of violence actually, the increase of violence is actually making it more important to support the women civil society organization at this particular moment, so they can be able to mitigate some of this violence at their very local context. So if we are to repeat the study that has been done with the Global Women Institute today, I am sure the numbers will be doubled, if not even tripled. Because women, the situation in South Sudan is very, very, very not good. Just recently, yesterday, the central bank announced it's run out of funds. So, and there's increase of violence. So it's a very new country, but yet the challenges are really, really very much. So it's a very difficult environment for the women's civil society to work on. So, but we have hope, and we have hope when looking forward for two more important documents that might come out from this gathering that we have, the outcome of the Croc research study that you have seen the survey going on. We have a lot of hope in the outcome of that because it's focusing on increasing funding to women organizations. It's focusing on how to strengthen relationship between local women peacemakers and international funders. And we're also hoping from this study that we are doing, so we will be able to come up with a capacity building initiative. And I really want to thank OSIA for supporting a lot of women organizations, including SWAN on the ground, to be working. So with that, I wanted to thank Dr. Nada Ali for the question that you asked. And I also wanted to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Jane also. She is a faculty from University of Fordham. These two women gender specialists influence a lot of work that SWAN is doing. To answer your question in terms of the role that the South Sudanese Women Organization can be able to influence the DDR process, I just wanted, from my own perspective, the DDR process in South Sudan is basically maybe dead, the process dead by now, because lack of fundings, lack of instability, lack of conflict, and of course, lack of misuse of funds. There's so much funds before that was channeled toward the DDR, and as you might know, the situation with that. And we hope South Sudan will strengthen itself and stand up again, and with the current economic crisis, so that people can be able to focus more on the development. As mentioned by one of the speakers before, people now in South Sudan are focusing more on the basic needs of life. We have conflict going on, we have flooding going on, we have COVID-19 going on. So there are so much people are dealing with now. So the focus probably right now is the basic needs of life. But with that, I would like to conclude by thanking all of you once again. And I really wanted to thank the Croc Institute for initiating the Women Peacemakers program that inspired a lot of women, including myself, to put this program together. I would like to thank Dr. Morris for the generous support that she's been giving. I would like to thank also the South Sudanese Women Intellectual Forum, and a special thanks to Skylar and Divyani. And Skylar and Divyani, can you please turn your video on so we can say thank you to you? And I would like to ask everybody to please put your hand together for these two young ladies. Without them, this event would not be really possible. Thank you so much for the support you give. And before I conclude, I also wanted to ask all the panelists and the speakers to put their cameras on. So if we can have a screen zoomed for with everybody, do you think we can have that, Skylar? That all the speakers, all the panelists, all the presenters?
Sure, yeah. I think you'll have to stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
And then we'll be able to see everyone, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, all of you. So I think that is really very good to see all of you here. I'm just gonna take a screenshot of that. And thank you. And I hope to see you in the next event.
Thank you so much, everybody. We'll be sharing the recording on our website, and we'll also send out an email with the recording to everybody, and also the survey link. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Masara.
Thank you all.
Thank you.